Cześć! Zapraszam Was serdecznie na drugą część mojego wywiadu z Johnem McCoyem, czyli basistą, aranżerem, producentem, kompozytorem, którego możecie kojarzyć przede wszystkim z grupy Gillan, czyli solowego zespołu Iana Gillana, wokalisty grupy Deep Purple. Poza tym John przez lata, przeszło 50 lat swojej działalności muzycznej, grał w takich zespołach jak jazz fusion rockowy Zzebra, czy progresywno-hard-rockowy Atomic Rooster, z którym nagrał na początku lat 80. jeden album. Poza tym przyczynił się do powstania zespołu Samson, którego to album również produkował, a w którym swoje pierwsze kroki jako wokalista stawiał Bruce Dickinson. Zatem John to bardzo ciekawa osobowość muzyczna. Zresztą sami się za chwilę o tym przekonacie. Zapraszam Was na drugą część wywiadu z Johnem McCoyem. Miłego oglądania. We talk also about Samson, because I think that Samson was formed from your band, yeah, because you, as McCoy, Samson, guitar player, his name was John, sorry, I forget the name. Paul Samson, exactly, Paul Samson. He joined your band, and then when you left, he formed the Samson. Yeah, I think you are the original, originator of this band. Yeah, I can say.
Yeah, well, we got together, and at that time, when I first got together with Paul Samson, the band was called McCoy. Yeah. And that was because just before that, I had been working with Bernie Torme in a band called Scrapyard. Mm-hmm. And then Bernie decided to follow the punk explosion and formed the Bernie Torme band. And I was working with the drummer of Scrapyard, Roger Hunt. And he said, I know this great guitarist, Paul Samson. You want to meet up? And so we met up, and it worked. It was good. And we wrote some songs and went out and did some shows as McCoy. And sometimes we'd go out and the band name would change to Samson. And the songs were more or less the same, but the name was different. And we got more shows like that. But the thing about the Samson band was after we'd been working, playing shows, a management company got involved and decided we could record an album of the songs that Paul and I had written. And as I said before, I was doing sessions and production work, and a lot of the time we would work at Kingsway Recorders. And so that's the place that we went to record the Samson album. And that's when Colin Towns came in, and the whole thing kind of, at that time, Colin asked me to do the Gillan album. And Paul said, well, it's a great opportunity. So, of course, you have to follow that. And but we recorded the first Samson album that was called Survivors, and some good songs there, but it was low budget. We recorded it very quickly, and we had a good time. And I like a couple of the things on that album, but Paul Samson's great player, and he did the vocals as well. And when I left the Samson situation to form Gillan with Ian and Colin, the guy that came in to play bass was Chris Aylmer, and he knew the songs because he had previously been our road manager, and he was at the shows every night. And but I'm trying to remember what happened. Oh, they decided to get a singer, and they had this guy Bruce come in, and he recorded some of the songs on the Samson album as well. And but it's a bad thing, you know, with Samson. When I was still in the band, the drummer was Clive Burr, and Clive, brilliant drummer, fantastic drummer, and he ended up joining Iron Maiden, which meant that Paul had to find another drummer, and he ended up with a guy called Thunderstick, which is a guy in a weird mask and kind of crazy, and that caused a lot of attention for the band, and not really, what's the word? Because of that crazy image, I don't think they were taken that seriously, which was a shame. And it took a while to recover. But as I say, he got this guy in, Bruce, to sing, and all of a sudden he joined Iron Maiden as well. So Paul had provided another member for Iron Maiden. And it was a kind of very close-knit thing, you know, in those days. Everybody knew each other. And when getting back to the Gillan situation, when Bernie left and we all sat around saying, hey, what do we do? Who do we get for the next guitar player to carry on the tour? We all threw names into the hat, so to speak, and I suggested Paul Samson to join Gillan, but Ian said no, he's too businesslike. Maybe because Paul was running his own band and he knew about the business and everything. I don't know. And that's, of course, getting back to the question about the guitarists. That's when we got Yannick Gers. And I had been producing at Kingsway again, Yannick's band White Spirit. And, you know, I'd worked with Yannick, so I knew his playing and I knew his temperament, and maybe suggested that he could, you know, join with Gillan. And I mean, there were lots of names suggested. I would have liked Richie, but that would never happen. And, you know, Yannick, of course, you know, White Spirit had originally been, they played some Purple numbers in their set and they supported Gillan on tour. So Yannick sort of knew the band and it seemed like a good idea to get him in. And of course he jumped at the chance, and the guys in White Spirit weren't very pleased with me because I kind of messed up their band, but hey, that's rock and roll.
Atomic Rooster.
Atomic Rooster, yeah, what a band.
Yeah, recently they released a new album. Of course, there is only one guitar player who used to play in it, so it's not maybe this band anymore, because Vincent Crane is not no more, so he's long gone. And he was, as far as I know, Vincent Crane was very modest man and, of course, great Hammond player. But somehow it's so forgotten little, but unfortunately. But anyway, you play with this band shortly after leaving Gillan. I think it was this time. And tell us how you remember this period, because you play bass on the band that generally don't have bass player. Yeah?
That was a strange thing for me, because the guitarist in Atomic Rooster, guitarist, vocalist was John Ducan. And I had known John from his previous band in the 70s, Andromeda, which was a great heavy three-piece. And I kind of knew John more than Vincent at the time, and met Vincent, loved his playing, very clever guy. And as you say, very modest, quiet guy. And their drummer at that time was Paul Hammond, beautiful drummer. And to me, because I knew them, for me, that lineup was Atomic Rooster. That was the lineup that had the hits, Tomorrow Night, Devil's Answer. And it was John Ducan's writing with Vincent that made those hits. And it was a tremendous live act. And when they reformed, they got a deal with I think it was Polydor, yeah. Someone at Polydor, some guy in the A&R department, I can't remember what his name was, but he insisted that they have a bass player. And John called me and said, "Do you want to play bass?" And I said, "That's wrong, because the magic of Atomic Rooster was the fact that Vincent Crane played the bass parts with his feet on the Hammond organ. And that's what made that band so different. What do they want a bass player for? They say it's a heavy rock band, you've got to have a bass player." I said, "Well, okay, yeah, I'd love to play and do that. That would be great thing to do." But it never seemed quite right to me, because that was the magic of Atomic Rooster, was the fact of Vincent's playing and playing the bass parts at the same time. I mean, they just sounded so different from any other band. And but of course I did the album, and it's a good album, and especially the bass playing. And I know that they're out again now. They've done an album with the singer Pete French. He's a good singer. And what's that guy? It's Steve Bolton. Bolts. Yeah, he was in the band for a little while. I don't know, they're doing good, they're playing, and it's a name that gets gigs, so why not?
Anyway, if we can get back to 79 and the gig that Richie Blackmore joined the band. How you recall this gig? How it happened that he appear there and play with you?
Well, it was one of those periods where Richie and Ian were talking again, and I think Richie would have liked Ian to become the singer in Rainbow, and Ian would have liked Richie to become the guitarist in Gillan, and I think they were talking about those things. So Richie came to the marquee to play, and it was a surprise to me that he was there that night. And I knew Richie from before, and we had a good relationship. And so he got up and played a couple of songs with us, and it was kind of crazy, but hey, it was Richie. And the Gillan shows at the marquee were always sold out anyway, and having Richie there was a big event for that crowd, and it was good fun. Good fun.
Yeah, you played some song from Deep Purple, I guess. Yeah, the with Richie. Do you remember?
Well, yeah, of course. I think I can't remember. I think we probably played "Smoke on the Water" and
Black Knight.
Tokyo. I think we played that song, and some sort of rock and roll jam session.
About this rope incident, I read somewhere Mick Underwood, I guess, said about it. Can you remember this with rope that you were hanging on, and something strange happened on the stage with Gillan?
You mean the story is that we were rehearsing at a film studios in Shepperton, in Middlesex, in England, and the next studio was they were filming the Superman films, and I met the guy who operated the flying things, the wires that they hook on and they take the actors up, and it looks like they're flying. And I was, kind of interested. I'm always interested in, visual effects, because one thing I've always known is that people, when they talk about shows, they can describe what they've seen, but they can't describe what they hear. They can say it looked like this and that happened, but what can you say about how something sounded? You can't say it. Anyway, so I talked to the guy who did it. He said it's simple, it's really, you hook these things on a belt. And so I said, well, I would like to try it. So I tried it out. And from then we got the kit, all the wires, the ropes, and the special belt that you have to wear, and took it out on the Gillan tour. And it was kind of dangerous because we didn't have the guy who was, the professional operator. It was just a couple of the roadies that would pull the ropes and pull me up on this wire. So I tried it for a few shows, and of course, the first time that I rose up off the ground, the audience couldn't believe it. And I thought, this is great. And I could still keep playing more or less. And it was good fun. But the night you're talking about is, I think it, I think it was Glasgow that it happened. The night that you're talking about, that Mick was terrified because they didn't get the height of the rope correct, and they rose me up, and I was flying through the air and doing this kind of thing through the air. And it got a little bit out of control, and I started to spin on this rope and was somehow going towards Mick. And he was on the riser at the back of the stage with playing, of course. And I zoomed in on him, and he was kind of screaming, stop, stop. And I just hit the cymbals. I didn't hit him. I just hit one of the cymbals with my foot, you know. It was very, very dangerous, the whole thing. And he asked that we never did it again. Please don't ever do that again. But that was a magic moment. But I found out later that I had no insurance. The management didn't pay the insurance, so I could have died, you know, and they wouldn't have cared. It was a good show. And we did everything with Gillan. Everything was done as cheaply as possible.
You also record with Ray Gillen. Ray Gillen, the great singer, the Red Sun. It's not very well-known band, and future all great musicians apart from you. And Ray Gillen, yeah, the great singer that I think it was one of his last recording sessions. How you recall this period when you created this?
Well, you know, the thing with Red Sun, it was kind of a hangover from. I was out in America working on an album with Joey Belladonna, and that sort of fizzled out, really. And the guitarist that I was working with, how can I say this? The guitarist called Al Romano that was working on the Belladonna project with me. And after the Belladonna thing stopped and we were recording a McCoy album as well, some tracks from a McCoy album, I had to come back to England. My mother was in hospital and I had to come back urgently. And Al Romano still had some tapes of that we'd recorded together, and decided he was going to start this band, Red Sun. And kind of heavy stuff, you know. But anyway, I got a phone call one evening from Al Romano, and he said, I got the singer, Ray Gillen, here. He wants to talk to you. And I said, hi, Ray, how you doing? He said, man, I just love that song, Outrageous, and that song, I Know a Place. How do you feel if I record them? I said, please do, yeah, if you want to, you know. I'd recorded them with Al Romano doing the vocals. And so Ray kind of learned the songs from those demos. And that song, I Know a Place, is the last thing that Ray ever recorded, which is kind of sad because he did a good job. But he had a lot of problems, you know, a lot of problems. Very sad, sad case.
Gillan hadn't fit to Black Sabbath. That he somehow destroyed his band. I heard some of your opinion about he joining the Black Sabbath. You're not very pleased with this his singing on them with them.
No, I don't know about his singing on them.
With them, yeah.
You know, at that time, my two favorite bands were Gillan and Black Sabbath, and Ian destroyed both of them at the same time, you know, by wrecking the Gillan band because he had some kind of throat problems and couldn't sing. In my opinion, we were taking a break for a few months for him to recover, and I'd already started writing songs for the next Gillan album, and then all of a sudden he's singing with Black Sabbath. Excuse me, and it never worked for me. It just didn't work. I mean, I love Sabbath, particularly with Ozzy. And I couldn't listen to it. It just, for me, my brain couldn't take that voice with that. And it just didn't work for me. I don't know. I haven't listened to it in a long, long time. I don't really want to be honest.
So you haven't listened to this album anyway? Okay.
I heard it, and I don't want to hear it really. You know,
Okay.
I don't think it's not their best album.
Yeah.
I think it could do with a remix.
Yeah.
I'd do that. Thank you. I'd do that.
You know, as you are also producer, yeah, because you know many bass players are producers also. Yeah, I mean Roger Glover, you, Leo Lyons from 10 Years After. I can mention a few others. So, from your perspective, why do you think that it's like that? I mean, the producers are maybe most sophisticated musicians in the band. They are. What's from your perspective, how you see it? Because you learn about this producing, as you said, from the early 70s, and you're curious about how it works, and then you work as a producer.
I think, you know, a lot of good producers, particularly in rock, are the bass player. And I think it's because if you're the bass player in the band, you have to listen to everyone. And somehow you have to connect the guitars, voice, and keyboards, and the drummer. You have to be the glue that makes those things fit together. And so you have to pay attention to what everyone else is playing. You know, when I first started playing, I was a guitarist in the band, and in the 60s. And then I think if you were the guitarist and then the bass player, you understand what the guitarist needs underneath to make the guitar work, to make everything fit somehow. I think that's part of it. You know, a lot of the bass parts, you have to just pay attention to everyone else's part and understand what everyone else is trying to do. So maybe when you're recording, you have a certain awareness of everybody's input, And but you know, I've always been interested in sounds. You know, as a kid, you know, I got a tape recorder and was always playing with the sound, playing the tape backwards and speeding it up and slowing it down, and it's always fascinated me. And I don't know if you're aware of an album called White Noise. You ever heard that one?
Yeah.
You should check that out. You know, that had a big influence on me. The sounds of that grow into a much wider experience. You know, it's one of those albums like some of Frank Zappa's material. If you wear headphones, there is a certain space in there, in the headphones, which is more on some recordings than others. You know, somehow there's magic happens, and it's all about the placement of the instruments in the stereo picture. You know, when I'm recording something, I never ever have for instance, for me, I always start with the bass drum. I never have the bass drum exactly central. I have it just slightly to one side. And I started doing that when working with drummers. You know, drummers used to quite often have two bass drums, double bass drum kit. And the thing is, when you listen to a double bass drum kit, how do you know it's two bass drums? They can't all be central because it all just sounds like one drum. So you have to split them slightly, and so that you get that effect of side to side. And that's just one little thing that I learned with Ken Burgess, the producer of Zzebra. The placement of the instruments is crucial. And I was fascinated by the effect that can have, you know, just by moving something slightly from one aspect in the stereo picture. And I could talk about this crap for hours.
Yeah, as you said, you're a producer. You have long you know, experience with this, and yeah, you said you can talk for hours. It's interesting anyway. But
You know,
anyway,
I never think that I've got it exactly right. That's the thing. You always want to try and improve it for the next time, you know.
about John Buchan, yeah, because as far as I know, you also work with him on his solo album from 1977, I guess, or 8. After leaving Atomic Rooster, I think Buchan was mainly involved in cataloging and remastering his personal tape archive. And you also support him with this, yeah, for Angel Air Records. So anyway, what can you say about this period? Because John Buchan, after Atomic Rooster, just disappeared, I think. After the solo record, 77, you participate in it, and then I don't know what happened with him.
Well, you know, the thing with John is he did that solo album, and it was with Paul Hammond was the first drummer that played on those sessions, and Francis Rossi from Status Quo was producing and playing some guitar parts as well. It was a good album, solid songs, very catchy commercial stuff. John was kind of confused as the right direction, you know, that his peak was Atomic Rooster. That was, you know, the achievement. He felt that he was in the right place. But after that solo album, he kind of he went downhill, I think. His health wasn't that great, and we ended up living quite close to each other, and I introduced him to Angel Air Records, and that gave him an opportunity for an outlet for all his solo work. And I spoke to him a few times about, let's get together and do some gigs, you know, just to play, go out and play. But he'd lost it. He just didn't feel that urge anymore. And you know, if you're not too well, if you physically or mentally not too good, then it's understandable. You know, the rock and roll takes a hell of a beating on some people, and he just didn't want to do live shows anymore. And you know, for him to do that, there had to be, you know, a management, roadies, proper rehearsals, good gigs, touring, and the finance for that just wasn't there at those times. You know, it was finished for him. But he became an obsessive guitar collector. He had maybe 150, 200 guitars, I don't know, so many. But, you know, I miss him. It's like these guys, you know, him and Paul Samson, Bernie Tormé, a lot of guitar players that I would like to work with are now dead. So I don't know.